Hello, my name is Tommy Smith and I'm from Scotland. I play the saxophone, I compose, and I teach at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. I also run the National Jazz Orchestra, which I've done for 25, 26, 27 plus years, and I also direct a youth orchestra of very talented young musicians. But when I was younger, um, I didn't really have many opportunities like they do these days. So I grew up in a poor neighborhood, and my father drove a lorry, and he really liked jazz, and he played amateur drums, and he had a few records. So he would play some Stan Getz, some Coleman Hawkins, some Gene Krupa, some Dizzy Gillespie, some Glenn Miller at the weekends, and I would hear this music around the house, but I didn't really know what it was. My mother played pop music, so there was this kind of opposing genres going on in the very small house. I shared a room with two other brothers, and the walls were paper thin, so you could hear the neighbors um, very, very loudly. Anyway, when I was 12, I took an exam at school, and this was to ascertain whether you had any musical ability. So I filled out the form, and I remember the first question was, what instrument would you like to play? And I immediately wrote down tenor saxophone. And I really didn't know what a tenor saxophone was, but I'd seen pictures on the LPs and the small 33s that my father had. And all of a sudden, I was in possession of a tenor saxophone. The school had two, and I'd scored okay and was given the opportunity to learn the tenor saxophone. So I took it home with the book, which was called the Tune a Day. And the first lesson my father gave me was to copy, just by listening, what Stan Getz and Coleman Hawkins was playing. And at that point, I had absolutely no idea about theory or scales. I couldn't read music. I had no idea about anything. So I looked at the book, and at the very beginning, it had the fingerings for the chromatic scales. So I learned that first. And then I went about listening to these recordings over and over again and trying to find the notes that these players were playing. I would hum it and whistle it and try and find these notes, and then try and play the phrase in the same way that I had listened to. And for me, this is the key element about learning to play jazz, is the absorption of a legend that you really admire and you can listen to over and over again. Whether it's on the same instrument that you play or another instrument, it doesn't really matter, as long as there is the sensibility of jazz, its feel, its nuance, its time feel, the way that there's personality in how you play things. And so I absorbed a lot of Stan Getz and Coleman Hawkins, and I really still didn't know what they were doing, because I couldn't read music and I didn't know any harmony and I didn't know any scales. All I did was listen and imitate and listen and imitate, and that was the age of 12. And then my father took me to a jam session, which was more like a swing or Dixieland band. They played early jazz, and I was kind of forced into the situation. Went up and they said, "What would you like to play?" And I'd learned a blues. I learned three choruses of a blues, which was more like an improvisation. It was structured like an improvisation, but for me, I just learned it by memory, and I didn't know anything about the blues. I didn't know its chords or anything. I just remembered the way that the solo was structured. So I went up and played, and they gave me a round of applause, and I was like, wow, this is great fun. I was very nervous. I had butterflies in my stomach. I hot, sweaty hands, a dry mouth. My heart was palpitating. It was really a stressful situation because I was very shy. And then the next song was I Got Rhythm, and I knew the melody. And after I played the melody, they all turned around to me for the improvisation. And I kind of looked around and said, aha, that's all I got. And they were kind of dumbfounded because they thought I could improvise. And I couldn't because I knew nothing about improvisation. So at that point, I had to learn the alphabet. And the alphabet came from a book called Improvising Jazz by Jerry Coker. My dad had taken me to a Saturday jazz school, and the saxophone teacher and the clinic leader, a guy called Gordon Cruikshank, he recommended that all the students buy Jerry Coker's Improvising Jazz. And I remember that it was in many sections, and it was the most helpful thing that I ever read. And I didn't read any books because I was from a poor background. We didn't have books in the house. We had some music, and that was about it. And so reading this book and absorbing, first of all, the key elements for being able to know what notes to play were the major scales, the 12 major scales, the 12 jazz melodic minor scales, the 12 harmonic minor scales, and the 12 harmonic major scales. And then you have the modes that are derived from these scales, and there's 28 modes. So through the summertime, where there was lots of time not to do anything, I did all this study and learned the scales and the keys and practiced really hard. And suddenly something in my head clicked about the relationship between a chord and a scale. And I could see clearly that this chord scale would fit this chord. And it kind of lit up in my mind about the age of 13. And I was really excited, and I couldn't get enough of it. I was so hooked on learning as much as I could. And at that point, of course, I was listening and transcribing Dexter Gordon and early John Coltrane and Sonny Rollins because I liked what I was hearing. And that's the whole key of learning this music, is you have to sit at the feet of a master, a guru who you can look up to and just be like a sponge and absorb everything that comes naturally to you without it being forced on you. You just have to just get it inside your bones and in your blood. It's something that can't be taught, especially the way that you play the feel in the swing. It can't be taught, but it can be absorbed. So whether you are a painter who studies Monet and you copy every stroke, or whether you're a writer that is into John Steinbeck and you write down the paragraphs so you can get inside their head, or whether you're an Indian musician learning tabla, sitting at the foot of the guru, learning every phrase verbatim. That's the way that you learn this music, I think. But I still didn't know anything about improvisation. So I was kind of putting together phrases and lines I had learned from John Coltrane and Sonny Rollins, and knew that they would fit on certain chords. And I had bought a lot of the Ebersol records to experiment and try out all these things, especially the cycles, the dominant workout. Those were very important to me. And I had an LP player, so it would just spin round, and I would play these records over and over again, trying all these lines out and trying the substitutions on the 5 chords and working out, would this scale work in this situation. So a lot of homework, and every day, every minute, every possible break at school, I would go and practice. And I didn't really do anything else except practice. I practiced in the breaks. I came home, I practiced, and that's all I did. But still, I didn't know much about improvisation, because to improvise is a different story altogether. And I was to find that out later in life. Of course, when I played, there were elements of things that came out which would surprise me and would excite me, because I was like, what was that? What was that line that just came out? I didn't really expect those notes to be in that order and that sound to work against this chord and rhythm, and wow. And it was all a mystery to me. So age of 14, I put a band together, and we would rehearse every Sunday for the entire day, the entire day, from 11 o'clock until nighttime. And we would play all these standards, and the piano player would show me some new scales, and I would get really excited about it. And we would just play and have a lot of fun. And at that point, we were getting some gigs. So the interaction with an audience was really new to me, because I was still very nervous. But being able to play twice a week at the age of 14 in front of an audience was really a profound thing for a young musician, because you have to face a lot of things. You've got to face, if you can play in an environment where people are there to listen, and that is a big lesson. Anyway, so moving forward, by the age of 16, I managed to get to Berklee College of Music in America, and I was really excited about the theory. I had read and listened and knew a lot for a 16-year-old, but I still didn't know much about how to truly improvise. So by the age of 18, Gary Burton and Chick Corea I was aware of. Chick Corea had come to the school to do the first masterclass series, and I was invited to play in the big band. I was lucky to play in a small group and play his music. And Chick Corea had recommended me to Gary Burton, and that was a profound moment, because Gary Burton was Dean of Curriculum, and the irony of the situation was that he said I could either be in his band or stay at school. And of course, for me, I'd only been at school for 18 months. I thought that his school in the world, and because I had heard some of his improvisation lectures, would be the best thing that I could do. So I opted to not stay at school and join Gary Burton's band. So I was very fortunate and lucky to have that opportunity. So after the first concert, and I was playing songs by Makoto Ozoni and Steve Swallow and Carla Bley, and quite complex songs with really interesting harmonic progressions and beautiful melodies, rhythmically exciting. And I would play my solos, and then the next night I'd do the same. And Gary Burton would come up to me and say, I think what you did in that solo, and he would kind of relive the solo. He would talk through the evolution of it. And at one point he said, there's this phrase you keep on playing, but you played it last night as well, and I don't want you to play that again. And I was like, oh, is that the phrase that goes up to the high note? And he goes, yeah. He said, I don't want to hear you play that again. I said, okay, okay, I'll uh, I'll take that out. And I was saying, why is that? He said, well, it's not really true improvisation, Tommy, because you've got this exciting line that's stored in your memory, and you bring it out when you need a point of kind of a climax point in the solo. And I was like, okay. And so I was 18 years old, and I was listening really intently, and I was wondering, okay, I need to know more about this. So he began very slowly, just by saying, um, the important parts uh, of the improvisation is first to have a solid foundation, and the foundation is very simple. It's having a good sound, and hearing the intonation clearly, and being able to precisely play in tune, and having good time, and knowing all the scales, and having a great technique, and the variations in the way that you play through the horn, and the rhythmic variety, and all this stuff. So you have to have the foundation before you can go on to the really creative side. And so he said, you just take an idea, whatever comes out of the instrument at the very beginning. And he made a point of saying that the first idea is incredibly important, because it's the idea that not only do you develop, but it's the idea that hooks the audience into focusing on you. So you're on stage and you begin your first line, and that line has to be strong enough to capture the attention of the audience. And then you have to develop it. And there's two reasons why you catch the attention and then develop it. And the first reason is obviously so the audience can follow your improvisation really clearly. And secondly, it's so that you have an idea to develop. So it's pretty simple, really. But the difficulty is when the idea happens, and it could be anything, you have to figure out a way to develop it without changing it too much. If you change it too much, then it turns into another idea. If you don't change it enough, it becomes monotonous and boring. So with songs that have chord progressions, this is where it's a little easier to develop the ideas, because you have harmonic changes, and you have harmonic rhythm, you have form, etc. So it's a little simpler to take an idea through those kind of songs. And so I began thinking about this, and so I'm on tour, and I'm thinking a lot, thinking far too much. And there's not much coming out of my saxophone. It's pretty silent, really. A few lines here and there, but not much. A lot of space. And every night, Gary Burton would kind of analyze what had happened in my solo, and he would say, well, you should take that idea further. You've got to come outside yourself, Tommy would say, and look objectively at the lines and the people you're playing with, because you've got interplay with the musicians, you've got call and response, you've got space to consider. Space is there because it gives the rhythm section something to do when there's no soloist. It also gives you time to reflect on what you played and what you might play, which may be something that you hear in the rhythm section. But fundamentally, the thematic development has to be structured. And the main problem with you, Tommy, is that you're thinking too much. You're too focused on the future. And so I was like, okay, the future. All right, so what do I do? And he said, first of all, you don't think. No thinking. I was like, no thinking. Okay, so blank page, you begin the solo, and I'm not thinking about anything. And he's like, okay, yeah, that's right. You just react. You listen, you react, and you're outside yourself observing what's going on, being a little director in a way, but not being specific about playing this phrase or that phrase. And you have to be in the moment at all times. You can't be thinking about what's coming up. You have to hear the notes that are coming out in the millisecond ahead, so you can tune them and you can develop the melodies and the rhythms, etc. But you can't be too far ahead, and you can't be thinking. So I was like, all right. So every night I would experiment about not thinking, and sometimes it would just be a complete blank, and then I would start thinking, and then I would get into trouble with my solo because I was kind of tongue-tied. It's a bit like speaking as well. If you think too much, you certainly get tongue-tied about what words might come out next. So there was an element of kind of psychology involved, conceptual psychology, that you had to adopt, because not only is there fear when you go out into an audience, you've also got to eliminate the ego, so that the ego doesn't control your solo. And so if I say, for example, I would like to play good, or I hope I don't play bad, these are really negative thoughts. And they're negative because you're worried about not sounding good. And when you're worried about not sounding good, or not making a mistake, or getting lost, or embarrassing yourself, the focus is not on the thematic development. It's not on the improvisation. It's on the negative parts, and that's the ego getting in the way. So you have to not really care about the what happens. For example, if you squeak on your saxophone, or you play a funny note, or you don't quite reach that idea in the solo, then you've got to not care. The more you care, the less well it goes. So, right, so blank mind, don't think, and I don't care. I only want to focus on the now and the process and what I'm doing. So I'm focusing on the sound, the beginning of the sound, how the vibrato gets wider, and how it goes straight at the end. And then I breathe deeply, and I fill my lungs up, and I'm listening, and I hear the piano chord, and there's a note in there that is new, and I try and incorporate that, and I'm focused in the now. And improvisation is all about those things. It's about honesty, truth, not thinking, and obviously having a great foundation. If your foundation is weak, then it's difficult to improvise at a level where you can manipulate the ideas. But it's very difficult for someone to be courageous enough to say no to playing something that they've practiced a lot. And that's where you have these two schools of thought. One school is where the player has learned many, many lines and many keys, and they can join them all up with a little bit of improvisation, and it's very impressive, and it's very exciting, and it's like endless streams of worked out mathematics, etc. But it's not really from the heart. Even though they might be feeling emotional, it's not true. It's not from a place of truth. Um, when you improvise with nothing and you say to yourself, okay, I'm not going to play anything that I've learned, but I'm going to see if I can work these ideas in collaboration with the band so that there's interplay and I leave space for the conversation to happen, then that's where you really have a lot of fun. But it takes a lot of courage to say no to playing the way which impresses people. And if you play to impress people, again, that's involving the ego. And if you have that ability and courage to say no, then you may sound not great. But if you don't care about not sounding great, you will get into the process of improvising. Now, anyone can improvise with what little they have. I've worked with some people who don't really play instruments. Maybe they're artists and they have a vibraphone or they have a saxophone and they play a little bit and they really know how to improvise because they've got nothing really worked out. So they really improvise in a really profound way. And for a master improviser, that's where they're trying to get back to. They're trying to get back to their kind of childlike self when they had no inhibitions, they didn't care, they just played, they had fun, they listened, and the journey was all about telling a story that was that made sense to the listener and to the musician and to the band. Of course, if you're telling a story, the band can hear it and they can react to it much more than if you're just playing lots of cliches one after the other that they've heard in numerous situations. Stylistically, though, everybody has something to offer, their personality, their sound, the unique way they play the intonation and the time. Um, Everyone has that already. So the only thing that's missing is that development of ideas, and that's where the fun is for me. And you should enjoy the journey of. And I wouldn't never use the word try because try is negative. You got to play great, um, and not in an egotistical point of view. You got to play great, um, not good, and not. I want to try and play great. I don't want to use the word try. I just want to put myself in a really positive frame of mind, so I can focus on the now. And sometimes focus can be difficult. So a little trick I use, which is, I don't know if it's crazy or not, but I may look at a point in the room. I like to also see the musicians I play with. I don't like to stand in front of a group with my back to them. I don't think that's. I don't like that. It's. I like to have eye contact. So, but if I'm getting into my solo, I like to focus on a point and make it a little bit out of focus so that I'm focused on being out of focus. And then I try and make my mind free and then just go. And if you can't remember what you played, that's a really great feeling, because that's when you know you've made it. So no thinking, just concentrate and focus.